Ready, Ron? Or are you gonna let the whole song play? Ready? Yeah. Good evening. We come on the air tonight, half hour in advance of our normally scheduled show. I wanted to talk about something that is, I think, extremely important. As many of you know, about a week or so ago, Whoopi Goldberg made a statement. Well, she made a few statements, but one in particular, the fact that she said the Holocaust was not about race. Since that time, Whoopi has been suspended for 2 weeks from the show. Now, Whoopi has been on the show after Joy Behar. Whoopi's been there the longest. She serves as the moderator and co-host. And Whoopi really doesn't have a reputation of being the most controversial person. She does speak out on some issues, but in this case, which created a bit of a firestorm, and I'm not really sure why. Whoopi offered an opinion, and that being that the Holocaust was not about race. Well, because of that statement, ABC has suspended her for 2 weeks and said that her statements were both wrong and hurtful. But wrong, how? Are we not entitled to our opinion? Is our speech not protected by the First Amendment? And in terms of being hurtful, who was hurt by Whoopi's opinion? I know that there was a gentleman that came on from the ADA, I believe he's the executive director, who said that Whoopi's statement was hurtful in the fact that Adolf Hitler did not think that Jews were human or were a separate race. The reality is that there's one race on this planet, that is the human race. We try to divide ourselves up, but we all have a common ancestor, a common origin, and we're all the same people. So for Whoopi to be punished, I think that is more controversial, the fact that she was punished, than the fact that she made the statement. I mean, what do you think?
I'm not really sure I agree with the punishment. Maybe the punishment didn't fit the crime.
Absolutely.
However, I'm not going to say I agree with the statement. I think that if we start to do that and we start to dismantle um, people's belief systems and people's perception, because your perception is your reality, right?
Absolutely.
So if we start to dismantle people's perceptions, then I think that that gives people the right to think that they can dismantle our perception of the slave trade. So to me, we just have to respect. Everybody needs to respect everybody else, and just be sensitive.
But in a sense, they are dismantling our perception of the slave trade. In fact, in the state of Texas, what they're teaching in schools relative to the slave trade is that Africans came to this country in search of opportunity, basically negating 400 years of slavery and oppression. Right now, there is the debate, the hotly contested debate over critical race theory. Should that be taught in schools? And many states have already said they will not teach this in the public school system. And when we talk about critical race theory, which I know is sort of a departure from what we're talking about, but what we're talking about is history. It is how history is presented. For Black people in this country, Black, brown, poor people in this country, history has been presented, I guess, from a Eurocentric perspective. Very little is said about the origin of Black people. Very little is said about our history that go beyond the slave trade, what we did before Europeans came to Africa and enslaved us. So yeah, we should respect people's perceptions if they are based on fact. If it's factual, sure. In Whoopi Goldberg's case, she offered an opinion which, in a sense, could be considered factual. Yes, it was about man's inhumanity to man. Could it also have been about a racial aspect? Why couldn't it be both? And if someone has a perception that does not agree with yours, is it necessary to be punitive? Why not sit that person down and discuss it with them and find out exactly where it is they veered off from reality? Why is it that this woman had to be silenced for 2 weeks? That I don't understand. I'm still at a loss as to who was hurt or so hurt by her statement that they had to take her off the air.
I don't think that they took her off the air because someone said we're hurt. I think they took her off the air under the pretense that people would be hurt. That's what they did. And again, I don't agree with the punishment. But where I'm disappointed is that she's an African American woman who knows what African American people go through.
Right.
She knows how our struggle is minimized. I'm not expecting her to minimize somebody else's struggle. And then you said, well, why couldn't it be both? Why couldn't it be racism and man's inhumanity against man? That's not what she said. She said it's not racial. It wasn't racial. It was just man's inhumanity against man. And it's like the conversation you and I had before. I can't find a word to describe hate that makes you go and incinerate people. I can't find a word. To me, that goes beyond the scope of inhumanities against man. That just goes beyond that scope. So I'm just disappointed in Whoopi. Now, the other side of that is that she's been supportive and an advocate for the Jewish community for forever. She took on, what's her name? Her name is Karen Elaine Johnson.
Right.
Took on the stage name Goldberg, right?
Right.
So we know that she doesn't have an issue with Jewish people, right? But we have to remember that things have been so twisted. The definition of a Jew has been so twisted. For forever, we can't decide how we want to classify it. Is the term social? Is it economic? Does it have something to do with religion? We know it's a religion, but society can't even decide how they want to classify them.
Well, I think in terms of what Whoopi said, no one has said that Whoopi is an anti-Semite. Those charges have not been raised. No one has said that Whoopi does not support the Jewish people or the state of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
No one has made that charge either. What they are saying is that Whoopi basically, I guess she veered away from the narrative. And the narrative that we have been taught and that has been part of, I guess, the American lexicon is that what happened during the Holocaust is about race. Well, if your belief is that there's one race on the planet, the human race, then is it fair to say that, yes, this is about man and humanity and the man and negate the racial aspect of it because there's only one race on the planet?
But that doesn't mean that race is not behind what happened. That doesn't mean that race didn't fuel the hate. That doesn't mean that race wasn't a thought. Let's look at Hitler,
Mm-hmm.
right? So Hitler, the artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So initially, this whole thing started because he wanted his art to be shown, and the Jews were in social and economic control and power, right? And they weren't doing that. So he started taking all the art. He tied art. He's underground art. He was doing all these things with art. But to me, when I look at it, what I see is somebody that when he didn't get what he wanted, then he had to sit and he had to come up with a plan on what type of propaganda he was going to spew to get people to change the narrative for him. And that's kind of what he did. So, and we say, is it not about race? It was absolutely about race when Hitler said his ideology was that they were subhuman because they didn't have Aryan blonde hair and blue eyes. And I think I read somewhere this week it's only like 4% of the whole population
Mm-hmm.
that really has blonde hair and blue eyes. So if we wanted to say who's really the sub,
Right.
I won't. I'll refrain from saying that. But
Mm-hmm.
if we wanted to say that, they're really the minority.
Well, here's the thing. For Hitler wanted to go to the Vienna Art Institute. He used to paint watercolors, and he was not very good at it.
Mm-hmm.
It would be stuff that you would sell on the street, but it would not be something that you find in a major art gallery. Hitler's problem with Jewish people goes back to World War I. When World War I ended and Germany was defeated, and Germany had to pay billions of dollars in reparations, he blamed the Jewish people for their role in ending war and Germany's capitulation. So there was long-standing animosity.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to understand something. It wasn't just Hitler. In fact, I have a book at home called The Other 1492. And in the book, Professor Norman Finkelstein, whose family, by the way, lost family in the Holocaust, he talks about how the Jewish people were run out of every country in Europe. He talks about how sometimes, at least on 2 occasions, they were run out more than once, that being Spain, when they were asked to leave twice. Now, during this time in history, and we're talking the lead up to the war, what's called anti-Semitism was rampant, and not just in Europe, but also here. In fact, in this country, Henry Ford wrote a book called The Eternal Jew. He was a rabid anti-Semite. And you have to understand there are a number of American families that supported Hitler and his military buildup. You have to understand that at this time, Germany was pretty much bankrupt. So where did all the money come for the arms, the training, and the equipment? Well, a lot of that came from German industrialists, but also from Americans who supported Hitler. In fact, Adolf Hitler was the Time Magazine Man of the Year for 1938. And at this point, the Holocaust had already begun. So there were many people that supported Hitler, but certainly one of them was not Whoopi Goldberg. And I mean, it is funny, but she certainly did not in any way, and I don't believe she in any way wanted to minimize what happened during the Holocaust to the survivors and to all of the people who perished during World War II. And I went and looked it up. Estimates are between 75 and 80 million people that died. And that's probably an undercount. Because some people, if a woman is pregnant, you count one, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are people who just went underreported, like in our census in this country.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a percentage of people who go unaccounted for. So the same was probably what was happening in Europe at that time. And this is a global conflict, so it's almost impossible to count everybody and all the losses. But what we do know, what has come out of that, we know for sure that 6 million Jews were lost.
Mm-hmm.
But we never really talk about the others who died, who fought to liberate the camps. We don't really talk about them. And, you know, I think that people should be entitled to their opinion. And we are protected by the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. But if you're in a position like Whoopi was, as a major media show host on a syndicated talk show, do you have that right? And if you veer from the narrative, should you be punished in the way that Whoopi was? I'm still trying to understand what is it she did wrong when she offered an opinion, which again, in many respects, is factual. This was about man being inhumane to other human beings.
But Ron, it wasn't factual in the fact that she said it wasn't about race. So I think that the punishment was extreme. Right? I think that when you have a talk show, right, unless we've already established what the network's views are, right? The same way we come on the air, and before we come on the air, Genesis makes an announcement that our views may not necessarily be the views of Genesis Radio, right? So unless you've discussed this with the host of the show, right, everybody gets to say what they want to say. So I don't think that Whoopi should have been punished. I agree. There was a rabbi in Los Angeles who actually said, you don't change people, he tweeted it, you don't change people's minds by punishing them.
Right.
You change people's minds by educating them.
Right.
So there should have just been a conversation that took place, because I would imagine that after she had a conversation with a couple of rabbis, you think people didn't reach out to her? Of course they did. So after she had a few conversations, she retracted her statement. I don't think that she is the type of person to retract it just because she was punished. Whoopi's a very intelligent person. So I think that they said to her, you know, Whoopi, this was offensive, because it was. So here's the part that a lot of people don't know. And my son said to me, save it until the end of the show. And then that's not me. You know I don't listen.
Right.
I go against the grain. But me, you know, I identify as a Black woman, but my grandfather, or my paternal grandfather, was a rabbi. So my mother's African American, and my father's lineage is Russian and Romanian. We know the Romanians, they came up and they came through Russia, and I would imagine that's how she lived up with my grandfather, right? But so I get both sides, you know, and though I identify as Black, because my mom made sure that I wasn't going to be confused, you know. So as soon as I could talk, she was like, your mother's Black, so you're Black. So I identify as Black, but I'm very well aware of my paternal grandparents. I'm very well aware of the family that died in the Holocaust. I'm very well aware of my father's family's thought process and belief system as far as the Holocaust went. I don't think I could get or find anybody else to be more up close and personal unless they actually lived through, survived the Holocaust. So I just feel like we just have to be more sensitive. I don't want anybody to minimize our story, so I'm not going to minimize their story. And I think that that's what The producer's a whole nother. I don't even understand that. But I think the Jewish community is just wanting to make sure, they're wanting to be sure that it's not tainted or diminished. And I think we don't want our story tainted or diminished. So I just say, how about I just respect however you feel? And I'll respect it enough where I won't take it out of context. Maybe she should have said, we're told it's about race. Maybe I'm not convinced that it's all about race. Something else, but to say it wasn't, and she said it like 3 times.
Okay.
I watched the whole thing. It was like,
I watched it again before coming on here.
Yeah. So, and again, I'm a Whoopi fan, but we know she's arrogant. We know she's intelligent, right? We know that she's the one on the show. I was going to say she's a little bit like me, right? She's gonna bring the opposing viewpoint. That's kind of what she does every show.
Well, I'll tell you something, right? Two things come to mind. Actually, 3. According to the First Amendment, you have the freedom of speech. Okay. It appears as if some people's speech is protected and they're allowed to say whatever they want to say and there are no consequences. On the other hand, there are some people who sort of skirt the line of what would be considered controversial, and they're immediately suspended in it, i.e. Whoopi Goldberg. Now, when you talk about The View, they had a co-host by the name of Meghan McCain, who was constantly controversial, never suspended. Right? Okay. We had a former president of the United States whose protected speech led to an insurrection into the U.S. Capitol. People's lives were lost. Yet, that president, was he punished? This man is down in Mar-a-Lago figuring out ways to make more money for he and his family. No sanction. Whoopi Goldberg, on the other hand, offered an opinion, which I still believe is factual, right? Who said, I don't think, or this is not about race. And again, if we're acting on the premise that there's only one race on the planet and those are humans or Homo sapiens sapiens, then yes, this was about, in her perspective, man being inhumane to other human beings. Now, I don't think Whoopi in any way meant to minimize. I mean, what's her intention to minimize what happened in Nazi Germany? Understanding it did not only happen to Jewish people. There were a number of other people that were interned in these camps that suffered just as harshly as their Jewish counterparts. But I don't think that Whoopi meant to minimize what happened to them. Whoopi probably made her statement believing, look, I'm protected by the First Amendment. I can offer my opinion. And if my opinion is wrong, then explain to me why it is. And we had this conversation. I said, if you have a small child and that child does something wrong, that child may not understand what they did is wrong. If you punish them, all this child knows is I'm being punished. I don't really understand why, but I know that I'm being punished for something. In Whoopi Goldberg, in her case, she's being punished for her perception. Not that she meant to be hurtful, not that she meant to cause undue harm to anyone, simply her perception and belief. And I fail to see where it's harmful in any way. But there's one thing I think we need to do, because this is a topic that it's an emotional topic. So I think we should open up the phone lines. And if people have an opinion relative to what Whoopi says about the Holocaust or even on the issue of race, call in. The number here is 888-304-4401. Again, 888-304-4401. We look forward to hearing from you. So now what were you going to say?
I think that we need to establish and identify the script and follow the script. We can't, because we can't make noise if we're not going to apply that same principle when we do it. So we can't make noise and say, like you just mentioned Trump, right?
Right.
You mentioned all these, and that other young lady on the show,
Meghan McCain.
yeah, I mean, well, we know who her father is, right? So
was.
Well, you know, we know. So the whole thing is that she's controversial anyway, right? So we just have to make sure that we stick to the script, because if we don't, that gives them an excuse for why they don't do the same thing when we make noise about something. So we got to kind of stick to the script.
But now hold
Otherwise,
on.
it looks like double standard.
But hold on now. You kind of opened the door here.
Yeah.
So Trump, wealthy, powerful, Caucasian, insurrection, people died, no sanction. Meghan McCain, from a wealthy family, right? Prominent family, military family, father John McCain, right? War hero, senator, okay. Meghan McCain, many controversial statements that may have been harmful to some. No sanction. So is this sanction of Whoopi Goldberg, is it about race?
How about we disclose to everybody who the producer is that suspended her? How about we disclose that?
Okay.
Because the better question is, because again, I don't agree with the discipline. So the better question is, how did the sister do that?
Well, you know something? On the plantation, it wasn't the master who cracked the whip.
No.
Right?
That's
right. It wasn't the people who came to Africa, and I'm talking the ship's captain and the crew. It was not them who went and
set up
and caught the slaves and brought them to the beach. It was people that were just like us, right? Unfortunately, when people begin to hate or have self-hatred, they hate themselves so much that they have a tendency to be harsher to people that look like them than to others. And in the case of Kim Gardner, the sister that, decided to suspend Whoopi Goldberg, I'd like to hear her rationale. Because if the comments were hurtful or wrong, please explain why. Who was hurt by them? I've heard people say, since this whole controversy, that it was hurtful, it was harmful, it was wrong. Who are these people saying that it was wrong? Who are these people that have been so hurt, so aggrieved that they had to suspend Whoopi for 2 weeks? Who are these people? And if these people were hurt by what Whoopi said, then let's have a debate. Let's talk about it. Let's get the truth out there. What is it about, or what was this about? In fact, I think that in many respects, and I can't speak for the Jewish community, but I think that the mindset may be that the Holocaust is a separate and apart incident from World War II. Because in truth, the Holocaust began prior to the start of hostilities. So it may be viewed as a separate incident, right? And I guess there's an argument for that. But to determine someone's perception of what happened, who had the right to do that? Like, your mother's black, your dad Caucasian. Okay. Who makes a decision to tell you what racial classification you should subscribe to?
Well, do we really want to look at that? Because unless I announce to somebody that my father was Russian, who knows that? When you look at me, what do you see? You see a light-skinned black, a lighter-skinned black woman. That's what you see.
Right.
I can remember I think I was 20, maybe like 25, 26. I got in a yellow cab. And I lived in Yorkville at the time, which is predominantly in
Manhattan. Okay, Upper Manhattan.
I could walk to Dinkins to Gracie Mansion
Mhm.
before. But I lived in Yorkville, very nice area. Got off the train, was tired coming from work, decided to jump in a cab and go home. And the cab ride didn't go as expected. And the white cab driver, it's the first time I had ever experienced this. The white cab driver told me to get out of his car and told me the N word.
Mhm.
And I remember being absolutely devastated. The girl who grew up in the projects on 125th Street, I was devastated.
Mhm.
I had never heard anybody say anything like that to me. And my father was with my kids. I remember going in the house and crying to my father and saying, he called me this. And my father was looking at me like, okay, why are you crying?
Mhm.
And I think that was my first encounter with um, realizing what people see when they look at me,
Mhm.
right? I knew what I saw. I always saw a black person. Um, it's just what it is. How do you grow up in the projects on 125th Street and your mom is black and you not see a black woman?
Right.
So I didn't struggle with identity. But I think that was the first time that I came face to face with what other people saw when they
And
looked at me.
and that's the problem, right? People's perceptions,
Right.
right? So if you think about it, when the first ship docked in this country, slave ship,
Mm-hmm.
well, they took Africans off from various countries in Africa. Well, within years, or maybe a year, the identity was completely lost. They went from being Africans to being niggers,
Yeah.
from niggers to colored people, from colored people to Negroes.
Mm-hmm.
Something gets lost in translation,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, if you go back and you study Negro history, it doesn't exist, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you go back and you study history of black people, well, of course, that's the largest history ever. But in terms of Negro history, don't go beyond the shores of this country.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, people have their own perception. And if their perception is wrong, is it correct to punish them or to tell them, to educate them? And Whoopi never had that opportunity, apparently, because I mean, she went from talking, you know, giving her opinion to being suspended. So where was the conversation? Where was Whoopi given an opportunity to present her case that, look, I disagree? And, you know, she was on the Stephen Colbert show and she said, for me, race is what you see, right? So if you have a European conflict where you have people who pretty much look alike,
Mm-hmm.
do you understand the racial aspect of it? And maybe she didn't. But that's not about her attempting to be hurtful. That's maybe her not understanding.
Again, going back to the rabbi
Mm-hmm.
who said, how do you change someone's mind?
Right.
Because to me, changing your mind means I'm gonna enlighten you. The person's gonna be enlightened. So you don't do that through punishment, like you said earlier. So the punishment definitely didn't fit the crime, right? It didn't fit the crime. However, what I will say is that even though and I'm going to stand on that, I don't agree with the punishment. I understand she made a mistake. I understand we all make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
I could pick out times where I've said things and then gone home in my private time and said, damn, I shouldn't have said that.
Right.
You know. So we've all said things that we shouldn't have said. So I empathize, but I'm not going to say, Whoopi, it's okay. What I am going to say is I'm going to stand with you, my sister, about the level of punishment that you received for you just stating something in error. So because let's say it's an error, only because I'm not going to diminish how another community feels about their experience.
Mm-hmm.
The same way we tell people, don't try to tell me or say you understand the Black experience, because you don't, right? So, and I'm going to say that to the Jewish community. I'm not going to pretend to understand your experience with the Holocaust or what you've been taught through generations, right? I'm
Mhm.
not going to minimize or inflate it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to say, I'm going to respect how you feel.
Mhm.
And that's just that's where we need to be.
Well, I think Whoopi was doing her best to respect um, the feelings and sentimentalities of the Jewish community. Again, I don't believe she meant to be harmful, hurtful, even disrespectful. But in terms of people and their experience, well, every year there is information, television shows, things of that nature that come out that detail what happened in the Holocaust. So we're all pretty much familiar with what Jewish people endured from about 1935 to about 1945.
Mm-hmm.
For people, black people in this country, we don't have that same level of understanding about what we endured. And people constantly define who we are, right? Their perception. And we kind of put ourselves into that box. So, those of us of our generation, we've heard the term colored people, right? So now that is considered offensive to refer to a person who's African American or black as being colored. However, now people turn around and say, well, you're a person of color. What's the difference? Either you say I'm a colored person, now you say I'm a person of color. It's semantics. One is offensive, the other one, same basic language, but it's not offensive, right? Who makes the determination on perception? And who has control over that?
And here's where we discuss this too, because here's what has to happen. I'm not mad at them because they stand on what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mad at us because we don't stand on what we believe. We acquiesce, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how I said to you, what happened with the whole after George Floyd, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a whole movement for a sum and total of about 3 weeks, right? And then all of a sudden everybody ran out of steam. And I remember I asked you, I said, what that was the revolution? Was 3 weeks? The revolution was 3 weeks? Did we dismantle racism? Did we smash all these racist systems? No, we ran out of steam, and so that's where I have an issue because I want to see us take that same determination and passion that we get angry with that community about and say, oh, they always complaining about their treatment, they always screaming this and that, but they're determined to be heard. We start out wanting to be heard, but then we give up. We run out of steam. So when you say who is it that comes up with the perception, everybody's perception is their reality. And again, if we say it's okay to make statements like that about another community, then when I get in a cab and somebody thinks it's okay to call me the N-word, then that has to be okay too, because guess what they could say? Well, I think that that's what you are. Right? So do we say because it's freedom of speech you get to say that to me?
But that has been that has occurred in this country.
But and what I'm saying is that doesn't make it right.
Well, it's not about right and wrong, right? We're talking about perception, right? So if a person's perception is a certain way, well, that is based on what they've been taught, their experiences, right? The people that they interact with. This is what they know. It's a very narrow view of the world, but it is what they have. So the only way you're going to change that is to interact with those people, talk to them, educate them, let them know why it's considered offensive. Let them know that the historical impact of it. But you don't just say to this person, hey, look, I'm going to punish you. Because all you do is you create more hurt, more animosity, more anger, more resentment. And you just said something. You said that for us, we run out of steam and use the term acquiesce.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
yet, you think that Whoopi, in a sense, should acquiesce.
No.
So you think she should stand her ground?
It's okay to for her to stand her ground.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you believe, you stand on. Because my position is not about what she said. My position deals with the way she was punished.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have to agree with what you said, but we just have to remember that there's no double standards. So if we're going to push for and we're going to, push this freedom of speech thing, then we just have to remember that that's across the board. So, and it doesn't matter how it makes us feel, right? Because that's what we say. That it doesn't matter how people feel about what she said. What matters is that she has a right to have an opinion. I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. Paul Mooney, the comedian, the late comedian, I was a big fan. I would go see him in New York. And he said, you may not agree with what I say, but defend my right to say it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's about, defending the right to speak out. If we don't stand up for Whoopi and others, right, what happens to our right, the right to speak out, right? Let's be realistic. Right now, the right to vote is threatened.
Mm-hmm.
A right that we never thought we would lose. We thought, well, Dr. King won that. So many people died to register to vote. And now we're at a crossroads where we may lose that. So if we do not stand up and say, I will demand and defend the right to speak out, that right will be threatened too, as well as so many other rights. What we could do 40, 50 years ago, can't do it today. We're supposed to be in an enlightened society, right? But are we? Are we going backwards in terms of our thinking? And it would seem as such. And I think that for somebody like Whoopi and anyone who wants to stand on principle and speak out, they should absolutely have the right, as long as it does not cause harm. And there was clearly no intent to do harm. Again, we go back to somebody like Donald Trump. People died. We talk about some of these other guys like the late Rush Limbaugh. He said some very inflammatory things. Don Imus, nappy head holes. Well, was he sanctioned? Whoopi Goldberg makes a statement that in no way, clearly there does not appear to be any intent to harm anyone or to be hurtful, even disrespectful, and she is told, you got to be quiet for 2 weeks.
So should our position be that we say or insist that she wasn't wrong, or should our position be that we want fair and equal treatment?
I think it's both. I think you have to demand fair and equal treatment, and I also think that in terms of what Whoopi said, it hasn't proven. Who's proven that what she said is wrong? If that is her perception and her belief and her experience and what she's been taught, what's so wrong about it? What did she say that was wrong? If that is her perception, show her where she was wrong. This woman that Kim Godwin that suspended her, why didn't you sit Whoopi down and explain to her the level of hurt you caused and why? And the answer is because Kim Godwin probably don't know.
No, I was just going to say that.
She probably doesn't know.
She probably doesn't know, and she was probably more concerned with how many of her bosses are Jewish.
Right.
And how much of the money that funds that network is Jewish money.
So acquiesce.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
But here's the thing. I'm not asking for Whoopi to do that. Mm-hmm. What I'm saying is because there's a difference. You say acquiesce, that means I'm back down, but I'm backing down, not agreeing with anything that you're saying. Mm-hmm. It's almost like I'm giving you that. Mm-hmm. Right? I'm gonna give you that. But if we just are understanding and just demonstrate some empathy for other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll think before we say things. And guess what, Ron? You can say whatever you want to say. As radical as you are, you think before you say things, right?
Well, yeah.
You think about, is this going to be something that may not be taken, the way I mean it,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think about things sometimes. I've even had my kids say to me, sometimes there's some things that you have to think about before you say it. Not because we don't see you as a black woman, but because if somebody who knows your father is white, or was white, he's dead, but if they know your father was white and you say certain things, the eyebrows go up like, did she really just say that? And I'm a black woman, right? So it's just about being empathetic to how my statements might be received by the listening ear. And again, I'm a fan of Whoopi. I would stand with her and say, I don't agree with the fact that she's home for 2 weeks. I think that she should have been allowed to come back on the show. I think that a great panel would have been her and maybe someone who was very offended by what she said. And then maybe that fabulous rabbi from Los Angeles who said we needed to take this as a teaching moment. Because in essence, that's what he said. And they should have had a discussion. A discussion should have taken place. And you know what I heard Nick Cannon say? This is his words, we live in a cancel culture, but we need to take the cancel culture and turn it into a counsel culture. And again, that's a teaching moment, right? So that's what we need to do. But we just keep going back saying, doesn't she have the right? Doesn't she have the right? Doesn't she have? Of course. I just want to make sure that we're looking at that like that across the board.
Well, across the board, no, right? Some people are held to a different standard. Some people are punished for the slightest infraction. Other people do things on a much grander scale. And, people look the other way on it in this country. And, we could talk about the issue of fairness. Was what happened to Whoopi fair in the grand scheme of things? And again, I would like to hear from people who were offended. I'd like to know why this was so offensive. It's not like Whoopi made an anti-Jewish slur. It's not that she said anything that in any way could be considered to be anti-Semitic. So what was so hurtful and harmful that we had to go to this level to take this woman off the air? I think that, you talk about a teachable minute or moment, and there are so many. These are opportunities for us to engage in dialogue, right? So that you understand where I'm coming from and I understand where you're coming from. But in this case, that did not happen. There was no meeting of the minds. And, one thing I disagree with, if you have a position and it's a strong position and is based on fact as you know it, I think you have to stand on what you say, and I don't think you should apologize. If what I'm saying is not meant to harm anybody, if what I'm saying is based on fact as I know it, who are you to tell me I'm wrong? Now here's what becomes controversial when we talk about the Holocaust. In my view, the Holocaust, even discussing it, is extremely controversial because I think that some people feel that if you are not part of the Jewish family, you should not be discussing the Holocaust, especially if you're going to discuss it and you kind of depart from the narrative. And I think that's what happened with Whoopi Goldberg. People say that Hitler was a racist and he was trying to build a master race. Well, look, Hitler wasn't the first to do that. He certainly won't be the last. And let's be realistic. This man was living a fantasy. He was saying, that we have these Aryans that were 9 feet tall with blonde hair and blue eyes and were so muscular. Well, where the hell are they? Did they ever exist?
No.
And in terms of an Aryan, Hitler and those who supported him probably didn't do their homework.
Mm-hmm.
If you go and you research the Aryan, it goes back to Arius, who was a black man. So what were you really trying to build, Adolf? Black people?
Probably so. But again, you know what you said that stuck out to me? That if she believes that she didn't say anything to cause harm, she should stand on what she said.
Mm-hmm.
I have to beg to differ with you about that.
Okay.
Because if you and I have a conversation and I say something, I could believe it from now until the time Jesus comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If what I say to you hurts you or offends you, whether I believe it's true or not, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to say to you, Ron, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't change how I feel.
Right.
That's just me saying, I'm sorry because I didn't mean to offend you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it was anything wrong with Whoopi apologizing. I think that was the big thing to do, especially when you possess a stage name like Goldberg.
Mm-hmm.
You took on that stage name. That community has looked up to her for years.
Mm-hmm.
They have considered her an ally for years, right? She could go, not to mention the type of men she likes, right?
Right.
So she doesn't have a problem with that community.
Right.
So I think that it was important for her to say, if I offended you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt anybody. Because at the end of the day, right, it's smart business-wise, she needed to do that. And then in addition to business, a good business decision, she needed to do that because if all these people looked up to her all these years and considered her an ally, and there were people that were hurt or offended by what she said, they were probably devastated. Because we know they can be really devastated,
Mm-hmm.
right? When they're devastated, they're really devastated,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they were probably really devastated because not Whoopi. There's no way Whoopi could have said that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that she did the right thing apologizing. Again, I want to take it all the way back around the mulberry bush, back to him. And that's the person that I would like to have a conversation with, to just ask her, what made you go to that extreme? And then the next question would be exactly what you said. What about the other young lady who should have been sanctioned and suspended on numerous occasions?
Mm-hmm.
Because she's offensive all the time.
Right.
Okay? So I think she's not on it. She just
left
quit
the show, I guess maybe a year or so ago. Yeah.
When she had the baby, right?
She came back after she had the baby. The other co-host, I can't think of her name, she left as well. They were clashing quite.
Oh, I know you're talking about.
Right. I can't think of her name, but the two of them were clashing. And, Megan was constantly clashing with Joey Behar.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it was always friction on the show. But I guess at the time, it was about ratings. So I guess people fed into the friction and it made them want to watch the next day. What are they going to say today,
Mm-hmm.
right? But eventually, I guess they realized that this mix isn't working, right? So she's off the air, and I think she may be working with Fox now,
Okay.
Megan McCain, which is probably more
Her speed.
exactly,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when you mention a network like Fox, they get on the air and they say some highly offensive things,
Mm-hmm.
but they're allowed to say it day in and day out. And no one sanctions them, even questions them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, where do we draw the line?
And that's the part that's surprising. Again, I would want to have that conversation with Kim because to me, The view has always been a round table of controversial discussion.
Right.
And they've always all disagreed with one another, and brought up opposing viewpoints. I always imagined that that was the model for the show, right? They opposing viewpoints. We're going to bring up what they did it with vaccines, they did it with the election, they did it with every topic you can imagine. They gave you opposing viewpoints. So my question again would be, Kim, how come?
Well, I think that when you talk about opposing views, I think the problem is when you talk about certain subjects or subject matter, you can't have an opposing view. There is a narrative that is written, and you have to stick to that narrative. And if you do not, you end up like Whoopi Goldberg, suspended for 2 weeks. Yes, you have your constitutional rights. You're entitled to your opinion, but not on every subject. Sometimes what you say can be used against you, right? Oh yeah, can be used against you. And, that is what happened with Whoopi Goldberg. And not just Whoopi, so many other people, when they talk about certain subjects, immediately have to apologize. I saw on Facebook where, Facebook is an open forum where people are allowed to offer their opinion. And someone said, because I wrote a piece about, what happened to Whoopi Goldberg. And somebody said in this country, look, realistically, there are 2 subjects that you cannot talk about. You cannot say anything that in any way comes close to offending the Jewish community and the gay community. Now, that's their perception, right? Is it right? Is it wrong? It's theirs, right? And, you might be able to sit down and say, well, look, you don't want to offend anybody. You want to be considerate of all people, right? But their perception is, well, there are some people you want to be especially considerate of. And again, that's their perception, right? That's what they believe. So I guess you just have to accept it.
Are you accepting that that's their perception, or are you just accepting that we need to be kind and considerate people? Because that's, I just said this to somebody the other day. I treat people, I purpose myself to treat people the way I want to be treated.
Right.
So I don't ever have these, like I said, there might be times when I say something and I go home and say, dang, maybe I shouldn't have said that. You could better believe tomorrow I'm going to see you, I'm going to call you, and I'm going to say, listen, I gave some thought to what I said. I just wanted you to know, I hope I didn't offend you. I don't even wait for you to tell me the truth. I offended you. I say, I hope I didn't offend you, right? Because I sit and I process conversation. So my whole thing is that if you live your life purposing yourself to be kind to people, you don't have to sit and do a damn review of every conversation or everything you say, because guess what happens? That's what comes out. That's what comes out. Kindness comes out. Consideration comes out.
It should. However, for people who are believers, right, and whatever you believe in, if you are a believer, let's say you're a Christian, right? Well, Jesus was a controversial figure. If you're Jewish, Moses was a controversial figure. So was David. If you are a Muslim, Muhammad was a controversial figure. These men did not come to this earth to accept the status quo. And the message they left was for us not to accept the status quo, but we are. And the reason we do that is because of power. Not the fact that, I'm standing on my principle, I'm standing on the tenets of my faith. This is about power. And, if you are Christian, Muslim, Jewish, In order to go into the pulpit, what must you have? A license.
You hope.
But who says, who determines the fact that you have to issue me a license to speak the word of God? What level of arrogance has to exist for you to tell me that you're going to license me to get into a pulpit to teach what I believe to be true? My religion, I have to teach it based on you presenting me with a piece of paper to say, okay, it's good. You can talk now, boy.
Another segment of the system that we live under.
Mm-hmm.
These are all just examples of the systems and the problems that we have with systems. I'm not surprised about that.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? Nobody said that you have to have that.
Right.
They said to marry somebody you have to have that.
But
to
why?
do a funeral, because that's what we've allowed them. We've allowed them to say
That's my point.
But you see what I'm saying to you? You're saying she has the right to do that, but it has to be across the board.
Mm-hmm.
We can't pick and choose when we want to apply that principle. That principle has to be across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to say it's not going to just be applicable when we want to make it applicable. Because guess what? That's what they're doing.
Right.
So that's why Trump didn't get in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why the other girl didn't get in trouble,
Mm-hmm.
because they're picking and choosing where they want to apply it. We can't do that. Somebody has to say it's not going to be a double standard. It's going to be applied across the board. And if we say it's going to be applied across the board, then we can't say, oh, she shouldn't have apologized. And we can't say that. We got to be fair.
You know, fairness, right, is a whole nother argument, right? That we could go on for days, just discussing fairness, what's fair and what's unfair.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about people like Dr. King,
Mm-hmm.
right, who tried not to be controversial, but understanding he was up against a system that would not recognize his humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Our situation is very different from other people in this country, right? We didn't come over as tourists. We didn't come over as explorers, for the most part. We didn't come over to this country because we had been invited, because during that time, America opened its doors to European settlers.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know what? We want to balance out European and the native people. So we need more Europeans to come. But for us, our story is very, very different. And we never told our story. Our story is told to us. So that, have you ever run across people who basically just got here from another country? Because, I worked at an international airport. And there were people who would get off the plane and look at me, and you see a black man. You've never actually seen one in the flesh, but you've already formed an opinion. Based on what?
Mm-hmm.
Based on what you see on television, what has been presented to you. So that is your perception, that is your reality, right? Well, we have not told our story. And if you're going to tell your story, look, it's going to be controversial. It's going to take some bold action.
And
you're going to have to speak out, and you're going to step on some toes.
Yeah, and I agree that we have to tell our story. We have to make a decision to tell our story,
Mm-hmm.
and not be mad when somebody else stands on their story about their history or
Mm-hmm.
their community. You do you. Tell your story. Stand on your story. Stand on your belief systems, and in turn, I'm going to tell my story. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like we get mad at them because they stand their ground and we don't. And you just said it yourself. We have to tell our story.
What?
So the question is,
mm-hmm.
Here's the question, Ron. You ready?
Absolutely.
So when do we go to the village and say, we need to tell our story? Whoopi, instead of you trying to attempt to tell the story, my sister,
mm-hmm.
instead of trying to tell their story, right? or what your perception is of their story. How about you use that platform to tell our story?
Well, how about this? Whoopi is very influential.
Yeah.
Probably got some money.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what Whoopi needs to do after this incident, right? And I would imagine there's got to be some degree of humiliation that Whoopi felt. Right?
She said it is.
Right. So why not Whoopi? Why not leave the View? Why not get together with some other influential and wealthy people and let's start a network? Down in Philly, they have Black Information Network. If you go into some of these, if you go through your channels, you see networks that are designed for Black audiences where we can tell our story.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe what Whoopi needs to do is get together and maybe support one of these networks. Just her popularity, just her influence could direct people just to say, look, I'm going to, as a sponsor for this network, think about how many people say, okay, I'm going to watch this, right? And with that support, more money comes in from advertising. Now you can tell the story. Danny Glover wanted for years to tell a story of Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. They won't put it. They won't make the film. Why? Because it tells a different story. A story that's basically inexplicable, how people that had no military training defeated Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to allow that story to be told. But what about if we put it on television, on a Black network? Or make a movie and put it in Black-owned theaters.
Okay, so who's going I'm gonna ruffle feathers now.
Mm-hmm.
Ready? So who's going to go get backing for this network? Whoopi Goldberg or Karen Elaine Johnson? Which one?
Well, you know what? We know her as Whoopi Goldberg, and we accept her as such. Let me tell you something. Yes, even though she goes by the name Whoopi Goldberg, right? We know her as such, but we also have supported her. Listen, Whoopi's first acting role was Celie.
Yeah.
She should have won an Oscar. We didn't care what her name was. We know that she brought that character of Celie to life.
But not how we see her.
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about that. That wasn't the question.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know how we see her. We've been supporting her.
Mm-hmm.
I said, who's going to do that? Is Whoopi Goldberg going to do that? Or is Karen Elaine Johnson going to do that? Because that's another question I'd have. How come you changed your name to Whoopi Goldberg?
Well, I guess we kind of figure out why. But if she says, I'm Karen Elaine Johnson, who the hell is Karen Elaine Johnson? Most of us don't know that's her real name, right?
No, we don't.
There were so many people that have utilized stage names, so we don't know her as anything other than Whoopi Goldberg. But if she uses that influence that comes with that name and directs people to a network, because let's be realistic, we have the power, we just don't know it. We're just not aware of it. Right now there's a controversy in the National Football League.
I heard, yes, it is.
Black head coaches
Mm-hmm.
won't hire them. The players, 70% Black. Yet in the front office, we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
Head coaching positions, we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if these players say, we're not going to play till we're represented? NBA, probably 80% of the players, Black.
Mm-hmm.
Front office, head coaches, different story. How about if they say, no, we're not going to play to the front office and the coaching sidelines are reflective of the people on the court.
So are we back to the revolution? Because again, that's what I said. These are things we have to do. We have to do these things.
Well,
that would be great to see us do it.
Well, something, it is being done, right? The revolution is an ongoing process. You have revolution and you have evolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is an evolving process, right? So you have somebody like Colin Kaepernick,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who said, no, I'm not going to stand for the national anthem, I'm going to take a knee
Mm-hmm.
because I'm protesting the treatment of black people in this country, in terms of poverty, in terms of police brutality.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to take a stand. Well, what I respect so much about this young man, he never apologized for what he did.
Mm-hmm.
He was standing on his principle, on his belief, on his reality, his perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this is what's happening in this country is wrong. And, as a person living on this planet, if you believe in anything, understand you're always going to have some people, and who are going to disagree with you. And there's going to be some controversy. Again, Jesus was controversial,
Mm-hmm.
right? He went into the temple and threw the people out. So, you have to stand on your principle. And sometimes people may not like it. Sometimes people may feel that they're offended by it. But does that mean you do not preach it? Now, here's a point for you, right? There are certain parts of the Bible that deal with certain behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's one that says that basically homosexuality is an abomination, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If it says that, should you not speak it when you get up in the pulpit? Should you avoid that subject? Or do you have to say what you believe to be true?
That's if you believe that to be true.
Is it in the Bible?
If you don't, you think everything in the Bible, this is a completely different day and age. I mean, a man wrote the Bible. Men wrote the Bible.
Yes.
Right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff in that Bible that I would have to say, okay, maybe we need to revisit this. Right?
So what you're saying is there's a lot of controversial statements in the Bible.
Oh, absolutely.
But people still read the Bible. People still believe it. So you're not going to live on this planet and not be controversial.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
You have to be.
But the point is that we have to be controversial.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be. We cannot say, okay, we're just going to apply it here and then get mad when another community does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
They have the right to practice that same principle.
Sure.
And we can't get mad when they do that. We have to allow them to practice that same principle. Because then what happens is we live in a system where there's equity, right? Because everybody is standing on what they believe. And we're learning to respect one another's perception. Right? Just respect it. You don't have to agree with it, but respect it. And respecting it means that I don't need to try to diminish it. Just if that's how you feel, that's how you feel.
Well, you know what? When you talk about a system of equity, right? That's the way it's supposed to be, but that's not the way it is, right? If it was equity, well, then Meghan McCain would have been silenced. She would have been suspended. Donald Trump would have been in jail.
Mm-hmm.
If we're dealing with a fair, equitable system, we are not. We're dealing with a power structure, right, that does not like to be challenged. And again, that's the whole premise behind Jesus or Moses or David or Muhammad. There was a system in place. And all of these men came to challenge that system.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the people being challenged are not going to like it. Like, who are you, the carpenter's son, to challenge me? Yes, I am going to challenge you.
But we're challenging the wrong people. Challenge the system. Don't challenge the other communities, because the other communities are up against that same system.
But to the same extent.
We're not talking. See that just goes back to what I said.
Mm-hmm.
We want to do this thing with who suffered more and who goes through more. Everybody's experience is their experience.
Absolutely.
So whatever your experience is, they're up against the same system. It may be in a different capacity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Your experience, even I'm an African American woman, you're an African American man. Your Black experience is not my Black experience,
Okay.
right? My Black experience is not, I'm a woman.
Right.
You're a man. We have two different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Is one less than, or is one minimized and one, exacerbated? No, it's everybody's experience, and let's point in the right direction to the system,
Mm-hmm.
to the oppressive systems,
Mm-hmm.
right? That are looking to oppress everybody except those people, right, who designed the system,
Right.
right? So we all in the same boat. We just
Mhm.
gotta. Somebody take the front of the boat and paddle. Somebody take the sides of the boat and paddle. Somebody take the back of the boat and paddle. And let's point it in the right direction to the system and not to one another. That's how we can. Because guess what? Maybe if we did that, maybe Trump there would have been consequences,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe, I'm not saying it would have happened, but maybe it would have,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we all started to work in unison, right? Maybe there would be some real change. Because when I look back to Martin Luther King, and it wasn't just us that was out there. It was white people out there with us,
Absolutely.
right? So we gotta get on this thing together. And again, I would just love to. I wish it was a way for me to talk to Kim.
Yeah, I like to. I have some questions for her as well. I mean, I understand her role, right? She's in a position where I guess she is the messenger from gets the message from on high, and sometimes she didn't even wait for it, right? If you say something that may be construed as being offensive, oh sister, you got to go sit down somewhere. But when you talk about Dr. King, when he started out, was pretty I guess, confrontational, not very controversial. But as Dr. King, as his thoughts evolved, Dr. King's perception changed. In fact, Dr. King said a couple of years before he died, I fear that I'm integrating my people into a burning building. So he began to see that the system, right, was not accommodating to us. And that, there were people who were an integral part of the system that wanted to exclude others from their seat at the table. And that's what I mean when I talk about the roles people have in the system. You know what I mean? The system is supposed to be, quote unquote, fair to everybody, but it's never been that way. And there are people who count on that because, let's be realistic, nobody wants to share the wealth. No, if you have power, you want to maintain that power, and you're not willing to share.
They don't want to share the wealth. They don't want to relinquish the unearned advantage that they have. That's systemic. That's all systemic racism.
And we need to break those cycles.
But again, that just goes back to what I said. Keep the focal point where it needs to be on the system, and not these communities. These are sub communities, right? That are all under the same system. So we're not talking about that it may not be some people from these communities that are part of that system.
Right.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying keep your focus on what needs to be dismantled. The system,
right?
Not the communities. The communities make up this world we live in, this country we live in. We have to dismantle the systems. Everything is systemic.
No, I agree with that. The system is in a state of disrepair. And, I mean, what happened with Whoopi is just an example of that. I mean, if we're going to punish people for their view, for their perspective, right, then there are a lot of people who should have been punished. A lot of people who should have been taken off the air.
Absolutely.
Or off the airwaves, period, right? But it was allowed. But when members of a particular group stand up and speak out, it becomes a problem.
Didn't they cancel Arsenio Hall's show?
They did.
Yeah.
And do you remember why?
Yeah, because he had Farrakhan.
That's right. And if you think about it, Dr. King was just a Baptist preacher. But when he said what was happening in Montgomery, with the buses
Mhm.
was unfair, they put a target on his
Mhm.
back.
Mhm.
So whenever, Colin Kaepernick, another example, this young man, NFL player, had his life laid out in front of him. He decided, I'm going to take a stand. I'm going to stand up for what I believe is right. Put a target on his back. The other day he was in New York, and as he was leaving, somebody was yelling and screaming at him, right? What did he do wrong? Same thing. What did Whoopi do wrong? If I'm standing for my principle, if I'm seeing police brutality, I see what happened with George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. I see it. I'm not going to turn a blind eye. I'm going to stand up for my people. All of a sudden, you become the enemy.
I want to agree with you.
Then please do.
I want to agree with you. But Whoopi wasn't standing up for us. That wasn't standing up for us.
Mm-hmm.
That was trying to discredit somebody else's perception of their experience, of their family.
But you say
experience.
discredit. Do you really think Whoopi was looking to discredit anyone?
I don't think she purposely did it.
Mm-hmm.
No, absolutely not.
Right.
Why would she? She's been an advocate and an alliance. She's had an alliance with the Jewish community for forever.
And she's on ABC.
So right.
Right.
So I don't think she did it intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, that's the role that she plays on the show.
Mm-hmm.
She just, I guess in her arrogance, maybe she spoke too soon. Because I believe had she thought about it for a moment, she wouldn't have said all of that. I really believe she wouldn't have said it because she has too much of an alliance. And we all know that community is very sensitive
Mm-hmm.
about the Holocaust. They just are,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't think she would have said it if she really gave any thought to it. I think she was just talking. I think they were doing what they do on The View, right? Because they get into heated debates on The View.
They do.
So I think she was just doing what she does on The View, and she said it. And you know how after you say it, you say, maybe I shouldn't have said it, right? She said it 3 times.
I think Whoopi. I think what she was doing was giving her opinion based on how she sees this period of history, right? What she's learned over the years, and again, the show feeds off controversy, right? The more controversy, the more people want to tune in the next day to find out what she's going to say now. That's why they kept Meghan Kane around, right? So, yeah, but I think that in Whoopi's case, again, certain subjects you cannot speak about. Unless you're a member of that community, you cannot speak about it. And for Black people in this country, as I said, our story hasn't been told. Our story is told for us, right? So when people come to this country, they have these preconceived notions and ideas that, okay, well, yeah, you live in the projects and you go dynamite like JJ. I'm sorry. I know you see it on TV, but that's not reality, right?
Okay, so if we're getting ready to tie everything up, can you and I, after all these reasons for us to reason,
Mm-hmm.
can we agree that we need to turn our focus to what our focus needs to be, which is systemic, right? We need to turn our focus to the systems, and guess who's a part of those systems? The network, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we need to turn our focus to the systems and not to the communities. Appreciate the fact that some of these rabbis stood up, and a lot of people in the Jewish community stood up on Whoopi's behalf and said, this is ridiculous, this is too extreme, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there were some who said the opposite,
Mm-hmm.
but the majority said it was extreme. So we'll agree that that's great. We'll agree that we need to turn our focus to the system so that we can change some of these things. And here's the biggest piece of this whole thing. We can agree that we need to start telling our own story.
Absolutely.
I think that's the sum and total of tonight.
Mm-hmm. And I think we need to agree to disagree sometimes,
Absolutely.
right? And you don't have to silence somebody.
No.
I mean, if you're in a relationship, you're married or whatever, you're going to sometimes disagree.
That's right.
You don't tell your wife go sit in a corner because you don't agree. You don't tell your husband you're not going to have dinner tonight because you don't agree. So we can agree to disagree. And if we have a philosophical difference of opinion, then we can talk about it. And I don't think she was afforded that opportunity. And I'm just so happy we were able to talk about this tonight because I think this is very, very important. And I hope that some of our listeners, got the gist of what we're trying to say to them and understand that, there are just so many moving parts in this particular debate. It's not just about the racial aspect, if that is a part of it. It's not just about man's humanity, man. There's also the other piece, and that is your right to speak. And sometimes when you speak, you're going to challenge power structure. In fact, I think there's scripture that says speak wisdom to power or speak truth to power. So, you're going to do that and you're going to run up against a power structure that doesn't like it. With that being said, you still have to do it.
That's the beginning of change.
Absolutely.
Now, you know what else? If they can't talk about it anyplace else, we could talk about it here.
Right here on Genesis Radio.
Yes.
So, this was the fastest hour and a half.
It was.
I just wish we had more time to continue this. And I wish people would have called in and gave their impression of what happened with Whoopi. Because this is going to be an ongoing debate and a topic that will come up again. Somebody's going to say something and it's going to spark controversy. But, it's always a pleasure to be here with you and, just to talk about these issues and present them in this way. So we're going to be back next week. And, well, Romanay, what are we going to talk about next week?
I really just want to look at this whole thing with these young girls and these older men. So I don't know if you want to call it the sugar daddies or the cougars or we need to look at these relational dynamics.
Okay.
And that's it. Had a good time tonight. Whoever didn't call, but maybe they want to give an opinion, they could definitely put it in the comments.
Reach out to us on Genesis Radio on Facebook.
Yes.
Yeah. And we will get back to you.
Yeah.
We will respond. All right. So on behalf of myself and Romanay, it has been a pleasure again. Want to thank Dutchie Bang. And we're going to make way for the next show. Please stay tuned for that. You will enjoy it.
Grace and peace.
Good night.
That was good, Ron.
Yeah. We got we got to monitor to see, the numbers for this week.
Yeah. Oh, they're gonna be mad at me, right?
They're gonna be mad at both of us. For sure, right? Because, we talked about the subject that they don't really like talking about unless they're doing the talking.
Oh, but it has
But what, it's 7 o'clock.
it has to be some dialogue, though.
It should be. And that woman should have been allowed to give her opinion. And somebody should say, well, Whoopi, A, B, and C, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, okay, you take 2 weeks off without pay.
Well, like I said, I would love to talk to Kim. Because I don't even think she got the orders from
She didn't wait for him.
She did that on her own.
Of course, she didn't wait for him.
She was trying to score brownie points.
Right. I mean, how do you get to be an executive?
Good night. Good show.
What's up, bro? How you? All right. You with sauce tonight?
I don't know what sauce. I don't know if he comes tonight or what.
Oh, really?
Hopefully he'll show up.
Yeah. Well, you by yourself tonight?
Me and Dutchie Bang.
Oh, I hear
My
you.
partner in crime.
I hear you. Come to the sister house with you.
Oh, she had to work. She had to find a job in New York.
Oh,
You know what I mean? Because she wasn't making no money out here. So
Oh, I hear
she had to go back to New York. You know what I mean? Do her thing. You know what I mean? But, like I said, we're going to rock it. We
I hear
all right. You know what I mean?
you. All right, bro.
All right, my brother.
Yeah.
Before you sit down, lock that door. Oh, they're
Okay.
upstairs. Never mind. I'll do it with you.
Mhm. I got a little something. You got cups in there?
Yeah, they underneath the sink.